Karoline Leavitt claps back at a reporter who twists her words. Watch his face change. It was the kind of interview that had been building up for weeks. Karoline Leavitt, a rising political star, had made waves with her recent commentary on the issues plaguing the country, and now she was sitting across from one of the more established reporters in the game. It was meant to be a simple discussion, a chance for Karoline to explain her position on key issues and defend her recent statements. However, the atmosphere in the studio was charged with a quiet tension. Everyone in the room knew the reporter had something else in mind. The set was pristine, with soft lighting and sleek furnishings that made the interview look like any other. The audience, though not visible to the guests, could feel the electric current in the air. Karoline sat at the edge of her seat, confident and poised, yet with a spark in her eyes that hinted at the fire she carried within. She wasn't just here to talk, she was here to stand firm. Across from her sat the reporter, John Pierce. Known for his sharp interviewing style, he had earned a reputation for pressing hard and never backing down. While his questions had always been direct, they were often designed to catch his subjects off guard. John was particularly known for taking words out of context and twisting them into something his guests would have to backtrack on. But Karoline wasn't one to backtrack. "Thank you for being here today, Karoline," John began, flashing a polished, professional smile as he adjusted his microphone. "I know you've been very outspoken about your beliefs on everything from economic policy to social issues. And it seems like your views have been gaining traction, but also drawing criticism from both sides of the aisle. You've called out the left for abandoning the working class, but what do you say to those who argue that your policies could end up hurting those very people?" The question was loaded, but Karoline remained calm, not the least bit ruffled by the challenge. This wasn't new to her. She'd faced criticism from every direction, but her message had never wavered. She gave a small nod, signaling she was ready. "Well, John, the truth is simple. For years, the left has promised change but failed to deliver, especially for working-class families. Meanwhile, we've seen policies that have only deepened the divide. My goal is to return power to the people, to give them opportunities that they've been denied for far too long. This isn't about political games, it's about lifting people up." The reporter leaned forward slightly, trying to sense any vulnerability in her tone. He had expected a confident response, but Karoline's certainty made him tighten his grip on the interview. He wasn't going to let her off that easily. "That sounds great in theory, Karoline," John responded, his tone shifting subtly, "but critics would say that your proposed solutions, cutting taxes for the wealthy, deregulating industries, will disproportionately benefit the rich, while leaving the working class in the dust. Can you explain how those policies would truly help the people you claim to represent?" The question hung in the air. It wasn't just a question, it was an accusation, one designed to make Karoline backpedal, to force her into a defensive position. She knew this tactic well. It was all about framing her ideas as harmful, even though her policies had always been aimed at creating economic freedom and opportunity. But Karoline didn't flinch. She had come prepared. "You know, John," she began, her voice still calm but with a sharpness creeping into her words, "the idea that tax cuts for businesses and high earners automatically means that working-class people are left behind is a misunderstanding of how economics work. When you reduce the tax burden on businesses, it allows them to invest more, hire more people, and drive innovation. That creates jobs and boosts the economy. It's not just the rich who benefit, it's everyone." John raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting such a strong, well-articulated defense. But he quickly recovered, his eyes narrowing slightly as he prepared for the next line of questioning. "But that's the thing, Karoline," he said, as if pushing her into a corner. "You're speaking about benefits that are speculative at best. We've seen time and time again that these types of policies often favor the rich and don't trickle down as promised. You say you're for the people, but when we look at your proposals, it seems like they only serve to strengthen the hand of the wealthy elite. How do you respond to that?" The tension in the room increased as Karoline processed the question. It was clear that John was trying to twist her words, to put her in the position of defending the wealthy rather than advocating for the American people. But Karoline was quick to recognize the trap. She leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with the reporter. "I don't believe in trickle-down economics, John," she said firmly. "I believe in empowering businesses and individuals to create their own opportunities. The government doesn't need to control every aspect of people's lives. The people are more than capable of lifting themselves up when given the chance." She paused, letting her words resonate in the room. "And I'll stand by that. If that means I'm accused of supporting the elite, then so be it. I'm not here to cater to the political narrative that wants to divide us. I'm here to do what's right." John paused, clearly taken aback. The interview had shifted. Karoline wasn't backing down. In fact, she was controlling the narrative now. The first round had been hers. But John wasn't going to let her win so easily. With a slight smirk, he leaned back in his chair. "So you're saying that the people who are concerned about income inequality and the widening gap between the rich and the poor are just misinformed? You don't think the current system is broken?" Karoline's eyes flashed with a sharp intensity, her grip on the conversation now tighter than ever. She could feel where this was going, and she wasn't going to let him twist her words again. John Pierce's eyes flickered with the faintest hint of a smile, but there was no mistaking the sharpness behind it. Karoline Leavitt had just countered his accusation with poise and clarity, and the first hint of unease was beginning to settle into his demeanor. He wasn't used to being disarmed so quickly. But the truth was, he had underestimated her. He had thought he could trap her with the same tired questions that worked on other politicians. But Karoline was different. And he realized that now. "Let's be clear, Karoline," John said, his voice adopting a more pointed tone. "You claim to be advocating for the working class, but when your policies favor corporate tax cuts and deregulation, it seems more like you're advocating for corporations than for people. I'm sure you've heard it before, that this trickle-down idea doesn't work. So why continue to push it? Are you out of touch with the struggles that people are facing right now?" The question was a direct shot at her credibility, aimed at painting her as out of touch with the real needs of the people. It was a classic tactic: twist her words, frame her as an advocate for the wealthy, and hope to catch her in a contradiction. John was hoping that she would show some sign of vulnerability, something he could use to expose her as an opportunist. Karoline didn't hesitate. She could feel the trap closing in, but she wasn't going to let him define her. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her voice steady and confident as she spoke. "Let's get something straight, John," she began, her tone unwavering. "There's a huge difference between policies that help businesses thrive and policies that only benefit the rich. You're equating two things that have nothing to do with each other. Cutting taxes for businesses doesn't mean we're putting more money in the pockets of CEOs. It means we're creating an environment where jobs can grow, wages can rise, and innovation can flourish." John's expression tightened, but he was determined to press on. He wasn't going to let her get away with this explanation without pushing harder. He saw the cracks, and he was going to exploit them. "But you're ignoring the reality that businesses rarely pass down those benefits to workers," John shot back, almost as if he were reading from a script. "In fact, it's the opposite. Wages remain stagnant, and profits soar. So why should people believe that your policies are really going to benefit them when they've seen time and time again that the system only works for the wealthy?" Karoline's eyes narrowed slightly, a clear sign that she saw through the reporter's line of questioning. This wasn't just an interview, this was a deliberate attempt to manipulate her words and ideas. He was trying to bait her into defending a system she had no interest in defending. "John," she responded calmly, her voice now tinged with a controlled intensity, "the fact that the system has been manipulated by both sides for so long doesn't mean that we throw out all efforts to make it better. It means we fight harder for real solutions. I'm not here to defend the status quo, I'm here to change it. I'm here to make sure that small businesses, the backbone of this country, have the chance to grow and succeed." The reporter leaned back in his chair, clearly surprised by the force of her response. He had expected her to retreat, to qualify her position, to stumble. But instead, she was doubling down, and it was beginning to unnerve him. The power dynamic was shifting, and he could feel it. You talk about change, Karoline, John said, his voice now less aggressive, though still trying to provoke her. But isn't it convenient that you found yourself in the position to push these policies after having benefited from them yourself? You've worked in politics, you've worked with the elites. Can you really say that you're different? That you're not part of the problem? Karoline took a deep breath, clearly recognizing the familiar line of questioning. She had seen it many times before. It was a classic smear tactic, designed to make her out to be a hypocrite. But she wasn't about to let him frame her this way. John, the fact that I've succeeded doesn't invalidate my ability to understand and fight for those who haven't. It's not about what I've gained, it's about what I can do for others. My success doesn't make me out of touch with the people I'm fighting for. If anything, it's proof that we can rise above the obstacles in our way, and that's exactly what I want to help others do. This isn't about me, John. This is about the future of the country. She paused for a moment, letting her words hang in the air. The audience, though unseen, could feel the weight of her statement. She wasn't just answering questions, she was defining the conversation. She was taking control of the narrative, and it was clear that the reporter, despite his best efforts, was losing his grip. Karoline's tone softened slightly, but there was no mistaking the clarity in her voice. You can twist my words all you want, John. But at the end of the day, I'm here because I believe in a better future for all Americans, not just the wealthy, but the hardworking families who deserve better than the political games being played in Washington. And if that's something you can't get behind, then that's your problem, not mine. John sat back, momentarily speechless. His face had lost its earlier edge. The camera crew, sensing the change, shifted slightly, as though adjusting to a new dynamic. Karoline had successfully turned the tables. She wasn't just responding to his questions anymore, she was making her case, unapologetically, and it was clear that the reporter had nowhere to go. For the first time, the audience could see the discomfort on his face. He was no longer in control. The studio felt different now. There was an undeniable shift in the atmosphere, and the audience, though invisible, seemed to hold its collective breath. Karoline Leavitt had taken control of the narrative, and John Pierce, the seasoned reporter, found himself struggling to regain the upper hand. His once confident demeanor had faltered, replaced by the unmistakable signs of frustration. He had pushed, provoked, and tried to twist Karoline's words, but each time, she had skillfully countered, leaving him with little to work with. John, sensing that he needed to land a blow to regain the narrative, took a deep breath. His hands, which had once rested casually on the table, now clenched into fists. He glanced at Karoline, trying to gauge if she might slip, but the calm confidence in her eyes was unwavering. She was no longer just defending herself, she was defining the conversation. So, Karoline, John began again, his voice much less sure than before, you say that your policies are about helping working-class Americans, but you've been called out for advocating for a system that rewards the rich. You've been criticized for your stance on deregulation and tax cuts. And frankly, it seems like the only people you're really defending are those at the top. Do you stand by that, or are you going to change your tune when it becomes politically inconvenient? Karoline didn't flinch. The attempt to challenge her was transparent, but this time, John's words seemed more desperate, like a final push to break her. She could see right through it, and she wasn't about to let him steer the conversation in the direction he wanted. John, she said, her voice calm but firm, the problem with the current system isn't that businesses are making money or that people are succeeding. The problem is that the government has been meddling for too long, creating unnecessary barriers and taxing people's potential. My policies aren't designed to protect the wealthy. They're designed to give every single American a fair chance to succeed, no matter their background. It's about opportunity, not handouts. The room grew even quieter as Karoline's words hung in the air. She wasn't just defending her position, she was flipping the script entirely. John had attempted to corner her with his accusations of favoring the wealthy, but Karoline had turned the focus back onto the core issue, opportunity and fairness. It was clear that her message resonated with the audience, even if they couldn't yet speak. John shifted uncomfortably, realizing that he had just been outmaneuvered. The shift in momentum was palpable. He had hoped for a defensive response, for Karoline to second-guess herself, but instead, she had reinforced her position with clarity and precision. He knew he needed to do something drastic to take control of the conversation again, but his usual tactics weren't working. "Sure," John responded, his voice more strained now, "but even with all your talk about opportunity, many would say that your policies still don't address the root causes of inequality. Your economic proposals have been criticized as trickle-down policies, where the benefits to the working class are only felt much later, if at all. Isn't it a bit naive to think that the people you claim to represent will benefit from these changes?" Karoline's eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time during the interview, a small, knowing smile curled on her lips. John had just made the mistake of underestimating her ability to turn his criticism back on him. "John," she said slowly, leaning in just a bit, "the people you're talking about, the ones who are supposed to benefit, are the ones who have been abandoned by a system that has kept them dependent on government aid. The same system that has promised change for decades but has only kept them in the same cycle of poverty and dependency. My policies will free them from that. It's not about waiting for the benefits to trickle down. It's about giving them the tools they need to succeed right now." Her words hit hard, and this time, it wasn't just her message that rang clear, it was her delivery. Karoline wasn't just answering questions anymore. She was taking control of the entire debate, dismantling John's attempts to undermine her with every response. John's face, which had once been confident and self-assured, was now a picture of realization. Karoline wasn't backing down, and she wasn't giving him the answers he wanted. She was exposing the flaws in his line of questioning and making it clear that her stance wasn't just political rhetoric, it was a genuine belief in economic empowerment. John blinked, visibly taken aback, but he didn't give up. He had built his career on challenging the narratives of politicians, and he wasn't about to let one interview change his approach. But now, it wasn't just the words he was hearing. It was the way Karoline had turned the tables, how she had managed to take a simple question and use it as a springboard to highlight the real issues at play. "You speak about opportunity, Karoline," John said, regaining some semblance of his composure, "but opportunity isn't always enough. People want to know how your policies will actually make a difference in their day-to-day lives. How will you ensure that these tools you talk about will help working-class Americans, especially when the same issues have persisted for years?" Karoline looked at him, her eyes now filled with a quiet resolve. "You're asking the wrong question, John. It's not about giving people more handouts or promises. It's about lifting the barriers they've been forced to live with. It's about reforming a broken system that's held them back for far too long. My policies aren't just a band-aid. They're a solution that empowers people to stand on their own, without relying on government assistance." Her words were final, definitive, and there was no mistaking the weight they carried. John had just been shown the truth, that Karoline wasn't just an up-and-coming politician, she was someone who could not only challenge the system but could see right through the questions meant to undermine her. The power dynamics in the room had shifted completely. John Pierce, once the dominant figure in the interview, now found himself in the uncomfortable position of trying to recover from a response that had left him speechless. Karoline had taken control, and there was no turning back. John Pierce's face betrayed the frustration he was trying desperately to mask. For the first time in the interview, he realized just how much control Karoline Leavitt had taken of the conversation. The sharpness of her responses, her ability to dismantle every question with precision, and the calm authority she exuded made it clear, he wasn't just losing the debate, he was being exposed. But he wasn't ready to admit defeat just yet. John had built his career on being tough, on never letting a politician get the upper hand without a fight. So he gathered himself, took a deep breath, and went for the jugular. "Okay, Karoline," John said, his voice laced with an attempt to regain control. "You talk a lot about empowerment and changing the system, but there's something that doesn't add up. You've benefited from the same system you criticize. You've worked with people who've contributed to the inequality you claim to be against. How do you justify your position when you've been part of that very establishment? Isn't it convenient for you to push for policies that benefit the people who've helped get you where you are?" The question was sharp, designed to hit her where it hurt, her own rise to power. If he could get her to admit that her success was tied to the same system she wanted to reform, he could claim victory in this interview. But Karoline wasn't fazed. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking with his. Her smile was subtle, almost amused, as if she knew exactly what was coming. It was clear to her now that John had resorted to desperate tactics, trying to undermine her by questioning her authenticity. But Karoline had prepared for this moment, and she wasn't about to let it slide. "John," Karoline said slowly, her voice unwavering and calm, "you keep asking about what I've done and who I've worked with, but let me tell you something. Yes, I've been part of the system. But that doesn't mean I'm a part of the problem. It means I know exactly how the system works and how to change it from within." The audience, though invisible, could sense the gravity of her words. She wasn't just answering his question, she was flipping it on its head, turning his own challenge into a demonstration of her strength. Karoline had already anticipated this line of questioning. She wasn't going to back down from it, and in fact, she was going to use it to her advantage. "You say that I've benefited from the same system that I'm trying to change," she continued, her voice growing more resolute. "But let me tell you something, I'm not ashamed of my success. I worked hard to get here. And now, I'm in a position to do something about it. I'm not just fighting for a few. I'm fighting for the people who've been forgotten by the elites on both sides of the aisle. And if that makes you uncomfortable, so be it." John sat back in his chair, his expression frozen. He had expected her to backpedal, to admit some hypocrisy. Instead, Karoline had boldly embraced the challenge and turned it into a statement of her mission. He had underestimated her, and now it was painfully clear. Karoline wasn't done, though. She wasn't about to let John recover from his own mistake. She leaned in, her voice sharp with conviction as she delivered the final blow. "I'm not here to defend the establishment or prop up people who've gotten rich by exploiting the system. I'm here because I know that the system isn't working for the people who matter most, the hardworking men and women across this country. If you think that by questioning my credibility, you can discredit what I stand for, you're wrong. My fight is for the people. And no amount of twisting my words is going to change that." The words were a knockout punch, delivered with such clarity and certainty that John's mouth seemed to go dry. The smug look he had worn earlier had vanished, replaced with a mixture of disbelief and frustration. He had no response. Karoline had not only shut down his argument, she had completely redefined the terms of the conversation. For a brief moment, there was silence in the room. Karoline sat back, her posture relaxed and confident, as if she had just delivered a statement of undeniable truth. John's face, once full of determination, now seemed like it had been caught in a storm of his own making. There was no coming back from this. "That's the problem with this system, John," Karoline said, her voice now tinged with a finality that left no room for debate. "People like you want to focus on labels and the people who sit at the top of the ladder. But you miss the point. It's not about who's at the top, it's about who gets the chance to climb. And that's what I'm fighting for." The words settled over the interview like a weight. There was no turning back now. Karoline had not only clapped back at John Pierce's accusation, she had obliterated it. The reporter, who had once been in control, was now scrambling for something, anything, to regain the upper hand. But it was too late. Karoline had won the battle. The audience, though silent, could feel it. She wasn't just answering questions anymore. She was shaping the conversation, pushing her message forward in a way that left no room for doubt. The interview had become hers, and it was clear to everyone in the room, including John, that he had just been thoroughly outclassed. The interview room, once charged with tension, had become eerily quiet after Karoline's savage clapback. John Pierce sat there, clearly rattled, his confident facade all but shattered. His mind raced, trying to think of a way to recover, to reassert some semblance of control. But with each passing second, it became more apparent that the conversation had already shifted irrevocably in Karoline's favor. Karoline, on the other hand, remained calm and composed. There was no arrogance in her demeanor, no smugness. She simply radiated the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing you've just won a battle and done so on your own terms. John cleared his throat, attempting to regain his composure. "Well, Karoline," he said, his voice noticeably more strained than before, "I can see you're not backing down. But let's wrap this up. You've made your position clear. But we both know that your critics won't stop. The question is, how will you respond when the media continues to twist your words, when your policies continue to be criticized?" Karoline's response was immediate, her tone firm but not defensive. "John, I'm not here for a popularity contest. I'm not concerned about the media or the critics. What I'm concerned about is the people who are being left behind. The hardworking men and women who've been forgotten by both sides of the aisle. If the media wants to twist my words, let them. If the critics want to keep attacking, let them. But at the end of the day, the truth will speak for itself. My policies will speak for themselves." John sat back in his chair, a clear sign that he had no more questions to ask, no more traps to set. He had been outclassed, outmaneuvered, and outsmarted. There was nothing more to say. His face, which had once been filled with certainty, now seemed pale. The attempt to corner Karoline had failed spectacularly. As the cameras began to dim, signaling the end of the interview, Karoline stood up, still calm and composed. John followed suit, though his movements were slower, more hesitant. The audience, though unseen, had clearly been captivated by the exchange. Karoline had not only held her ground, she had asserted her presence in a way that made it impossible for anyone to ignore her. As the crew began packing up, Karoline exchanged a brief but knowing look with the camera crew. She had come in with a message, and she had delivered it. There was no question now. She had left an indelible mark on the interview, on John, and on anyone who had been watching. The moment the studio doors opened, John Pierce let out a frustrated sigh, his gaze falling to the ground. He had hoped for an easy interview, one where he could trip up Karoline, expose contradictions, make her stutter or backpedal. Instead, he had been blindsided by her sharp wit, her unwavering confidence, and her unrelenting focus. Karoline had taken his best shots and turned them into opportunities to clarify, to strengthen her position, and ultimately, to deliver a message that would resonate far beyond the walls of that studio. Outside the studio, Karoline walked past the cameras and the reporters who were eagerly waiting for a post-interview soundbite. She didn't need to speak any further. The message had already been delivered in the interview. As she stepped into the waiting car, the driver gave her a quick nod, recognizing the victory in her eyes. "That went well," the driver remarked, keeping his tone casual. Karoline simply nodded, her face breaking into a smile. It did. Back at the media outlets, the fallout from the interview was immediate. Clips of the moment where Karoline clapped back at John Pierce began to circulate quickly, spreading like wildfire across social media. The media tried to spin the conversation, but no one could deny that Karoline had taken control of the interview, expertly handling every question thrown her way and turning each accusation into an opportunity to clarify her mission. The phrase "watch his face change" trended within hours, a testament to the power of Karoline's reply. John Pierce's stunned expression was captured and shared millions of times, his failure to trip her up becoming the story itself. Critics of Karoline found themselves on the defensive, scrambling to come up with new angles to discredit her, but the damage was done. The narrative had already been set. As the days passed, the momentum Karoline had built from the interview only grew. Her supporters rallied around her, praising her intelligence, her confidence, and her ability to stand up to the media. Her critics, however, were forced to reassess their approach. No longer could they assume that they could easily trap her into a corner. Karoline Leavitt had proven that she was more than capable of holding her own, and then some. And in the end, as the media continued to spin, one thing became clear: Karoline wasn't just a rising star in the political arena. She was a force to be reckoned with, someone who could take on the media, challenge the narrative, and come out on top every single time.